Hey, Carol, Flaggies.
Good morning.
Hey everyone, I am just recording. I think we're good. We're recording now. It's better work because I want to post this on the page afterwards. Anyone who misses it can see it. Can you guys read that? That list that you have?
Sort of.
It's too small, eh? There you go. A little bit better?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Got a couple people still logging on, so we'll just wait another minute and then we'll get started. All right. So as I was telling Steph a little earlier, we're just going to be doing a combo of explaining and we'll also be doing some practical stuff. So if you guys do have a wall that's close by, maybe just be there so that you can we can all practice drills together as well too. And there's quite a few of us on here, so I will do my best to try to like look and kind of check everyone's form and technique. But if you'd like to send me a video and if you want me to critique it, then I'm definitely happy to do that as well too. And
Yes, I very much anticipated this being a learning session as I am still in my bed.
Well,
we'll sip in that coffee. All right. All right. We had a really fun joke of the day yesterday, which we're going to repeat because I just loved it so much. Why don't ants get sick? Because they have little antibodies.
Oh.
Okay. One day it's not going to be a pun, and that day you will all be sad because you're so used to them. You're going to feel like something's missing. All right, let's get started. We're going to keep this this session to about 40 minutes. We're looking for, so I have a couple different objectives. Okay. The first objective is going to be for you to be able to assess yourself in one of 3 different places. And so we're going to sort of gauge you in terms of assessment on where you stand in terms of flexibility, stability, and strength. All right. First things first, though, I want to just talk about real quickly why we chose the handstand push-up. Number one, Steph, thanks for actually suggesting it. And when I started to, so Steph mentioned to me about a week and a half ago or so, that I was like, oh, I was thinking about trying to improve my handstand push-up during this time. And so what are potentially what are some tips and tricks that I could use? And so it kind of got me to thinking like, well, if Steph's mentioning it, she's probably not alone, right? And as soon as I posted that question, it was like rapid fire. Everyone was kind of like weighing in, which was really nice to see because it kind of shows, number one, we're not alone, but number two, it's actually a pretty good movement to practice during this time just because you can do it against the wall. You don't need any equipment to do it. It still can be very challenging and you can build a lot of volume as well too. And so we're going to talk about what are the different aspects you actually need to work on for you, right? So I'm looking for you to build a little bit of self-assessment through this process over this session, just to kind of have an idea. What am I stronger at and what am I weaker at, right? In terms of, am I flexible enough? Am I stable enough? And third, but not least, am I actually strong enough, right? We just want to get an understanding of what is the main thing that's missing for you. Because if you understand what that main thing is and just be able to prioritize them. So think about it as like sort of like a triage session, right? You're like a famous surgeon, you're in the ER, and then you have like 3 people that roll in. You have to be able to see what person needs your attention the most, right? So we want to approach it from the same way when we're thinking about the handstand push-up. It's just as important as saving lives, right? You got to have that handstand push-up. And so you want to see, what body do I want to save first? Do I want to improve my strength, my stability or my flexibility, okay? So we'll have a couple different tests for each of those just to be able to see, okay, did I score really low on this? Am I strong enough? Am I flexible enough? And then am I stable enough? That's the last one I was looking at. If you guys have questions at any point, just feel free to unmute yourself and weigh in. I think all you guys have been on Zoom before, so you're probably pretty familiar with unmute. So just feel free to, weigh in at any time. And so the main thing I think about, hold on, let me go one other person. Okay, and so the main thing that I think about when you're talking about the handstand push-up is, number one, flexibility. So there's two main things that you want to think about here in terms of the handstand push-up. Before we actually go into the test, do you have the shoulder flexibility and do you have the thoracic flexibility? Okay, so just really quickly, how much do your shoulders open up, right? Are you able to kind of get your shoulders up over your head? Or do you have a hard time, like even trying to wash your own hair, which can definitely be a problem if you're trying to do a handstand push-up because you just can't get your arms further back enough in order to be able to push up in a vertical position. Then next is the thorax, right? So for those of you guys hear us talk about that quite a bit in regular classes. So if you're thinking about thoracic extension, right, how much can you actually open up this thorax, right? We talk a lot about spinal flexion. So for example, when you think about the deadlift, we'll often, that's the first thing we'll emphasize, right? You never want to be rounded when you're doing a deadlift, but we're thinking about the opposite, right? So right now we're thinking about extension, right? So this is flexion, and then this is going to be thoracic extension. If you cannot open up your thorax really well, it just makes it hard for you to get into a position where you can do a handstand push-up. And so depending on how much flexibility you have, it's going to make it easier or harder. That's what you want to keep in mind. First things first, we're going to get up against the wall, and we're going to try the, scapular wall slides, okay? I want you to do 3 times 12 of these. I want you to do them really slowly, and I'm going to show you exactly how I want you to do them, right? And so we can use this to sort of just test what your shoulder flexibility is like. So the main thing is here, you want to get your butt right up against the wall. Your back and your lower back are all really into the wall. Your thorax is not opened up. It is closed because we're not trying to test the thorax. We're trying to test the shoulder flexibility, right? Get that right angle. And so what you'll do is try to keep your forearms up against the wall. We sometimes use this in warm-ups, right? So you guys might be somewhat familiar with this movement. And you're going to try to get all the way up against the wall and kind of try to do like an angel against the wall. So your hands should come out and around. I'll get you to go ahead and start this right now. So you're trying to go for 12 repetitions. Remember, butt is up against the wall. You're pushing your lower back into the wall. You're coming up and you're coming around, okay? And depending on how far back you can get your arms will dictate how good that shoulder flexibility is. There you go. And remember, you don't want to be off the wall. You're really pushing your whole body into the wall. In my case, I'll be 100% honest, and you can probably, I don't know if you can see that from the video, but I can barely get my forearms. They definitely come off the wall, especially near the top. So the idea is to go really slow and practice this movement if you find that your arms are way off the wall. There you go. And then try to keep that chest down if you can. All right, and let me take a look quickly. And if you don't mind putting the camera at a 45-degree angle to you, it just makes it a little bit easier for me to see you. If you want me to just take a quick look at, yeah. There you go. Good, Chan. That's it. And this is not a speed movement, right? It's definitely a quality movement. And this is something that you can easily do in a warm-up. And you do get better over time. That's what I've seen, is the more often you practice these, the easier it will be to stay in contact with the wall. The thing I really like about this movement for the scapular wall slide, it makes it easy to know if you feel more of the wall up against your forearms, you're doing it better, right? Simple as that. So there's a tactile cue that kind of tells you really quickly if it is improving or not. There you go. Yeah, and kind of gives you a bit of a, and you should feel that in the shoulders. I see Steph kind of shrugging a little bit, and that's normal. You should start to feel like you're getting a little bit warmer as well. There you go. And once you
Is it normal? It's like really hard to.
Yes.
do
It's
that.
really hard to keep your thorax down and keep your arms back.
Yeah, it's like, feels,
Yes, because the easy thing is for you to just open up your torso and then you're able to touch like no problem, right? But as soon as you come forward, that's where you can really tell how far back you can kind of get the hands. Once you try another set. If you're done 12, go ahead and go into your second and third set. Again, just practice, right? That's the main thing. We're just looking to see, once we do all these different tests, you'll kind of get an idea of which one of these suckers are harder or easier for you. And you'll be able to work on that piece. Yeah. And you can even try just one arm at a time. If you have a hard time thinking about which arm is easier or harder, because you might in fact have one shoulder that's tighter than the other, right? So if you try like, you can alternate as well too, or it's like, oh, you know what, that left one is hard. And I've seen it both ways where your dominant hand, because you use it more, can be tighter because you develop more muscle and therefore create more tension. But I've also seen it the other way where the weaker one, maybe because of a previous injury, might be tighter. So just think about that for yourself. Have I ever injured my shoulders? Is there any reason why I shouldn't, I can't put my hands behind my head? That will definitely cause an issue for the handstand push-up. Okay. Good.
Is it
Any
normal to feel it in your traps like a lot? Like here, like is that just because it's tight from sitting at a desk all day, or?
Yeah, and you want to not ideally feel it in the traps. You want to try to feel it in the scapula as you're kind of driving back. So just below that shoulder blade, you want to try to feel it there. So you might be overcompensating because a lot of times that forward rotation will pull on that trap as well too. If that shoulder is rotated forward, you might see a lot of tension in the pec, at the bottom of the pec, but you also might find a lot of tension in the trap. I've personally dealt with a lot of that, and it's a big pain in the butt. Because sometimes you need some body work and you need like some release there to kind of help deal with that shoulder so you can kind of pull it back into place. So that could be a clue that, maybe my shoulders are quite tight.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the next one now. All right, so next one is, I don't know why I cannot see myself. And so I can't tell if you can, okay, now I can see myself. Good, all right. So next one, for number one, is thoracic extension, all right? We're gonna see how much we can actually open up the thorax. It's a very simple exercise, right? It's kind of coming up with the hips on the ground, and you wanna see, hips have to be in contact with the ground, arms are perfectly straight, and you wanna see how much you can bend open your back within reason, right? Don't break your back or anything. There is too much in terms of range of motion. But what we want is we want to open this up as much as possible and just see how high you can kind of get. And I just visually will be able to tell you if you have good thoracic extension or not, just being able to see it because I've seen it so much. Yeah, that is good. Carolyn, you're good. That is not bad stuff, a little bit limited. Maddie, that's solid. Good. Pam, can you turn me a little bit more towards the hips? I can see. Generally, what you're looking for, just so you have a general idea. Yeah, and Chan, your hips are on the ground, right? Yeah, that looks good. Anyone who has issues with thoracic extension, you'll almost always have a very hard time in the overhead squat, okay? Just something to keep in mind if you ever notice that, because if you can't keep that thorax open, you're not gonna be able to keep that barbell overhead. It will always float forward. So it's usually gonna be, and it's funny, it's kind of one of the similarities between the handstand push-up and the overhead squat. People who have a hard time with handstand push-ups often have a hard time with overhead squats as well because of a lack of flexibility, usually with shoulders and thorax as well. So just something to keep in mind. There you go. That looks
John,
yeah.
by hips on the ground, you mean like your bones should be on contact, right? Like
yeah, yes, exactly. Yeah, it's okay if they're like half an inch off the ground, but you want, it really depends on how big your quads are. If you have big quads like me, then maybe your hips may not touch the ground, which I feel like all CrossFitters have strong legs though. So yeah, just as much as you can. Like you don't want to be off the ground at all and holding tension. You want to be able to just like very loosely relax and kind of see how much you can actually open up. And you can twist back and forth, okay? So one of those things that I have seen to kind of help is the twisting back and forth. So if you take the spinal column and you rotate it left and right, very often that will actually help it open up a lot, okay? So if you're noticing that you do feel a little bit of tightness in the thorax, what you want to think about is a lot of rotationary movement, okay? So for example, you hang from a bar, right? As an example, let's say you're in the gym. God bless us, let's get back in the gym. You can twist back and forth, right? And then that will help sort of open up your thoracic extension. Same idea with this movement, right? You're on the ground, you twist back and forth. That I've seen as being usually the biggest movement that will help with thoracic extension. That all makes sense? Questions there so far? Okay, let's move on. Next, last one for flexibility is going to be another shoulder stability one, and it's going to be the scratch test, okay? I don't know if you ever remember doing this in school. Really simple. One hand over, one hand under, and so you want to see how close you can get your hand. I actually have quite tight shoulders, to be honest with you, and so I definitely have a very hard time with this. And then you'll go the other side and see if it's greater or lesser, right? Just to kind of see how close you can kind of get those hands. And I usually gauge it just in terms of my palms as well. So do I have like a whole hand, two hands? And you might, if you're doing this alone and you have no one with you, you might want to get like a double mirror just so you can kind of see how close you can get them if you can't feel your hands. I feel like I'm, I don't know, maybe 6 inches away, more or less. So go ahead and try that out now. So one hand over, one hand under. And I've done this test with a lot of people over time, and females are just like significantly better almost all the time. It's very rare to see flexible males. And generally sometimes some people have kind of said that that could be because males are more likely to build like more muscular upper bodies overall, just in general, just stereotyping. And sometimes that can create more tightness over time. And so for females, they have just a much easier time being mobile. But it is very important in order to reduce, just to not have shoulder pain over time as well too. You want to try to keep those muscles supple. So it's a good little test that you can just sort of reach for. So if you think about it, you can just bang through this, let's say in a warm up before you're about to practice your handstand push-up drills. You do like, you know, a set of 12 scapular wall slides. You hit in the thoracic extension and you kind of just bellow back and forth in that position. And then you try to reach, you know, for let's say 15 seconds on one side, 15 seconds on the other side. You do that whole thing 3 times. That's like a really simple way to warm up your thorax and your shoulders. So when you start doing shoulder handstand push-up drills, it just makes it a lot easier for you to get into that position. And those muscles are already warmed up.
So John, it's your top arm. Like I'm tighter on one side. It's your top arm one is the shoulder. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So if let's say, so the one that I'm reaching up on, this one will generally be tighter, but it also, you know, how far back will also determine some flexibility in terms of the opposite arm as well too. But the main thing is the top arm kind of reaching back. You want to see how close you can kind of get them. Because think about it in that handstand position, it's that up arm, right? When you're close to your head. Good question.
Right. Thanks.
Okay, next is going to be stability. So there's 2 main things. Let me see if you can see that well. Okay, so there's a couple different things that we're looking at as minimal sort of gauges just to kind of see. So there's the main 2 things are shoulder stability and core stability, okay? So same thing like we looked at flexibility, we need those joints to be stable enough to bear our load, right? So a little way we can test that, the first one is going to be front leaning rest for 60 seconds minimum, and that's going to be testing core stability. So what we're going to do is we're all going to get into a push-up position, all right? But it's not any regular push-up position. We're not maintaining, it looks like we're maintaining a neutral spine, but we actually want a slightly curved spine. So if you think about the position that we hold for our hollow body, we want to mimic that, but think of just rolling over into a push-up position. So that looks very different than this, okay? So what we want is we want a 60-second clock. and I'm going to start the clock right here. So everyone, get ready in that position. Main two things you want to think about is hollow body, and then you want the arms perfectly straight, externally rotated, elbows twisted towards your head. So let's go ahead and start that right now. In 10 seconds. And I will look through this, and I'm just going to keep an eye out if you're able to really hold that hollow body and squeeze your butt. And go ahead. So 60 seconds. I'm not joking when I say that unless you have abs of steel, within like 15 seconds, you should be feeling this. If you're really squeezing your core. So you're thinking about two things. You're squeezing your core and your pelvis as hard as you can, and you're squeezing your butt. You're holding that hollow body position. Fran, show me a greater hollow body. Go ahead, get back in there. There you go. We're at 30 seconds. Should definitely be feeling that core push into that ground and squeeze, 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 squeeze. Good. We're at 40 seconds now. It should definitely be getting harder now. And don't let go of the activation of that core, because you need that inter-abdominal pressure in order to be able to get that handstand push-up. 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1, and rest. Good. All right. Feels like we all got there. The longer you're able to hold this, generally the better, okay? But in general, you want a minimum of 60 seconds before you start attempting a handstand push-up, because if you don't have the core stability in order to be able to hold yourself upside down, bad things will happen. People heard me use this example before. It's like you're a stick of juicy fruit and you're just gonna fold over, okay? You don't wanna fold over. You wanna be stiff like a board. Gotcha? Okay. Next, the next test we're going to use in order to be able to assess your handstand position is going to be, let me get that in the right spot, handstand position, okay? Minimum of 20 seconds before you start attempting an actual handstand. So what does that mean? That means that you want to be upside down against the wall. This may or may not be something you've already tried before, right? Because we're all at different levels. So something to keep in mind when you're getting into that handstand position is the kick up. That's going to be real tough. So remember, we're doing a handstand position, not a headstand position. So we're actually just trying to kick up against the wall. So you can do that in little parts, right? By kicking up slowly or against the wall, or you can simply roll into it. We're looking to try to hold at least 20 seconds. And from there, you can come back down. But before we start attempting negatives, you always want to be able to hold that position first. So the key is stability first and then movement later, okay? So go ahead, if you have a wall available, I will count 20 seconds from you, just so you can kind of see where you're at with this. There you go. All right. Go ahead, yes. Ten seconds, halfway. Good. And remember, don't look at the wall, look at the back wall. Don't look at the ground, look at the back wall. Carolyn, yeah, there you go, better. There you go. And rest, good. That is 20 seconds. So that would be the minimum you'd want to be able to hold before you start attempting handstand push-ups. So a couple things to think about when you're in that upside down position, all right? We're just kind of tying in what we learned already in terms of flexibility, in terms of where your thorax is and where your shoulders are, okay? So now that you know that what's tighter, what's looser, you may be compensating in that movement based on what is more flexible or what is less flexible, okay? So some points to keep in mind when you're in that handstand position is, so if you're, hold on, I'm getting hot already, all right. So when you're in that upside down position and you're kicking up, if you have flexible thorax, you'll notice that that will always be open. Your shoulder, and so what you want to do is try to hold that in and try to create a nice straight position. You guys see that difference? Instead of being overextended, you want to try to squeeze the butt, squeeze the core, and try to extend the shoulders in that upside down extended position in order to create a straighter position as opposed to a more hyperextended position through the thorax. Because over time, that hyperextended thorax position, although you can get in that position, will usually cause issues in terms of the lower back when you're hyperextended like that, okay? So just something to keep in mind if you're one of those people who saw you had very flexible thorax and tight shoulders, all right? That's why you actually want to try to avoid that overextension of the thorax. That makes sense so far? Haven't lost anyone? Okay. All right, so now that you have the stability of the handstand position and we have the core stability, then the next piece is strength, okay? And that's the final piece. So for strength, there's a couple different things you want to look at. We want to look at overall being able to just press your body up. So here are a couple different gauges to kind of test where you're at. So what we're going to do is, the first one is going to be a pike push-up negatives, all right? So you want to do as many repetitions as possible, all right? We're going to do 2 sets of this, and we're going to test what you can do for the pike push-up, all right? So you've seen us probably use this as a scale in regular classes, but I just want to go over what the standards are because they're very particular, and if you're not doing them properly, you're probably going to be putting a lot of pressure on the external rotation of the joints, on your external rotators, excuse me. And so when you're setting up, you can have an ab mat or you can have, let's say, even just a pillow, but you want something in front of your hands, all right? So you want to make sure that you're creating that triangle position where you're putting a third of your pressure in one hand, a third, and then a third, so that you're not putting all the pressure just on your head. Because if that happens, then chances are your head will roll forward and it's going to cause a lot of strain in your neck and your trap as well too. So something to keep in mind, all right? You want to make sure that, and this is why we kind of test shoulder stability first, to make sure your shoulders are stable enough in order to hold the weight of your entire body, right? And so what we're going to do is get into that position where we're in that TP position. Back a little bit. And so remember, the closer your hands are to your hand, the closer your feet are to your hands, you need to drive your head actively forward and then push up and away. We saw this movement a little bit earlier in the week in terms of the regular programming for the classes. Just keep it in mind that this movement should be incredibly difficult when you're practicing it, okay? So you want to be able to practice it at a point where you're not doing more than 3 to 5 reps at once. And practicing like repetitions that are between 1 and 5 reps are generally the best way to practice muscular strength. And that's what we're trying to do right now. We're not trying to build muscular endurance. We're not building aesthetics like bodybuilders for like 8 to 12 reps. What we're doing is trying to build strength. And so we want to use the rep range anywhere between 1 to 5 reps, depending on how hard that movement is. 3 to 5 would be a real sweet spot. And so what you're going to do now is find the spot that will allow you to do 3 repetitions. And so you may not be able to push back up. And if you can't, you're just going to rebend your knees. But go ahead and practice 1 set of pike push-ups right now. So think about keeping the elbows close and driving that head forward. That head needs to go forward to create that same position as the handstand push-up. There you go. And the more you drive your head forward, the harder it will be. Generally, the better you're going to be doing it. If this movement feels really easy, bring your feet closer. And so, Carolyn, I was just watching you do the movement and you brought up an excellent part that I forgot to cover. You'll also notice that sometimes when you're doing this movement, it isn't bad to be pulled onto your tippy toes a little bit, right? It's just a good sign that I'm driving that head forward and getting into that position. So what we're doing here is we're mimicking what the handstand push-up is like to a lesser degree, right? To a smaller portion. And so as I drive onto my toes forward, I'm really making sure that I'm coming forward. And so that could be a good sign that you almost want to think about. Try to push off your toes forward. And I feel like we never go on our toes in CrossFit, but in general, that would be a good time for you to do it in order to make sure you kind of get that same positioning as the handstand. Good so far? Okay. One thing I forgot to mention for the flexibility, aside from the shoulders and the thorax, the only other part is going to be wrist flexibility. Right? So if you feel a lot of pressure as you go forward, so As an example, if you have your hands here and you come forward, if that gives you pain, chances are extending your wrist is going to be very challenging for you. That's the only other thing that can give you problems when we're talking about flexibility. So just something to keep in mind. And how do you improve it? Honestly, generally, you keep your hands flat and you spend a lot of time in this position until eventually you can go a little forward, keeping the arms perfectly straight the entire time. Questions? We're good? Okay. Next, handstand push-up negatives, all right? You've done your handstand position. You can hold it for 20 seconds. How do we work on getting better at the negative, okay? This builds on what you learned in the pike push-up because you have to maintain the exact same position, right? You got to maintain that triangle position, and you want to think about coming down over 3 seconds. So let's go ahead and try 2 sets just to see how many repetitions you can control yourself down. You have, the most important, this is very scary for most people because you're like, holy cow, I'm coming down on my head. What am I going to do if I fall? Number one, if you can hold yourself for 20 seconds, generally what I see is that you should be able to do anywhere between 1 to 3 handstand push-up negatives. The key you want to really keep in mind, because it is very dangerous to fall on your head, is that you do not want to do another handstand push-up negative unless you can really control it over 2 to 3 seconds. It doesn't go from a 3-second descent to a 0-second descent. It goes from a 3 to a 2 to a 1. So once you start descending in a second or less, that is your cue to stop. Stop doing handstand push-up negatives because you will fall on your head and you can no longer maintain the time under tension. Okay, so go ahead and try set now if you feel comfortable. The idea again behind it is to really slow it down. So you're keeping your hands about a foot off of the wall. You're gonna kick yourself up and then you're slowly gonna push your head back ever so slowly. The slower, the better. And then come down and then you'll just kick off the wall and then come back up. And you'll see how many repetitions you can do. If you don't feel comfortable doing a lot of them, just do a short amount. We'll go ahead and try that now.
John, I have a question.
Go ahead.
When we're bending our elbows down, like, do we want like a 45-degree angle, like in our arm? Like, I'm thinking like with relation to like our armpit and like our sides, like that kind of angle.
Yeah, great question. So in the handstand push-up negative, you mean? Or
Yeah.
So in the handstand push-up negative, you want the elbows to come back. You never want them to flare out. You want them to stay really tight by your side, the same way they would, let's say, in a regular push-up.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And the main reason for that, Pam, get your hands a little bit more off the wall, like a little bit closer to the corner of the pillows. The corner of that pillow, sorry. Yeah, there you go. And then keep the elbows back. That's it, drive that head forward, down as you come. There you go. You will notice, okay, so it's important to note, so Maddie brought up a good point about the elbow position. You want the elbows to stay close as you're upside down. You don't want them to come out. It will make the movement a lot harder when you do that. That's the honest truth. It's going to be a lot harder, but the reason why we do it that way, it's important for you to know, is because it keeps the movement a lot safer. So what happens when you keep the elbows really close? The shoulder will stay back in its joint. But the second, whether you're overhead or pushing flat or down, if the elbow starts to flare out, as soon as that happens, rotation of the shoulder will happen forward. And then what happens is you put a lot more strain on your rotators, okay? And so you want to avoid that as much as possible because that's a really small muscle, and so we don't want to load it to a large degree because that can cause a lot of muscle strain over time. It's the same thing about the bench press, and that's why oftentimes, this is a little known fact, but in the bodybuilding community, a lot of times the bench press is bastardized because the elbows will always come back when they're coming down, and so that will cause a lot of shoulder issues. That's why some bodybuilders will say, oh, bench press is bad for your shoulder. It's not bad for your shoulders. You just haven't been doing it right for like years and years and years. And that's why you get like torn rotators, and then you have to shoulder surgery because all the bench press you did. And anyway, it's the whole thing. Not to go off on a tangent. Okay.
Quick question. When I tried that, there's this, like, it feels controlled, and then there's a certain spot where like it's weak. Like I know it's not controlled anymore. The closer I get my head to the ground.
Yes.
Is a way to strengthen that kind of weak spot.
Yes, absolutely. Great question. And so you'll notice, so Steph was asking about getting into the handstand position, having control at the top for the first maybe 3/4, and I bet you it's about 25% off the ground in terms of the total range of motion that you lose control. And that is actually very, very common. So right at that bottom position. So how do you work on that bottom position? Actually really segues really nicely into my third point. That wasn't even planned, but it worked out perfectly. Shoulder press, reps 1 through 5. So that would be the third thing you want to practice in order to get better at the strength part of your handstand push-up. And the beautiful thing about the shoulder press is it's full range of motion, right? So you're actually doing a greater range of motion in the shoulder press than you are for the handstand push-up. Because think about it, the handstand push-up really just comes up to your head and then you push back up. The main difference is you're loading your entire body weight on a handstand push-up as opposed to a shoulder press, which you're probably not loading your entire body weight, right? It's probably significantly lighter, which is why the handstand push-up will feel harder. But to answer your question, Steph, the reason why is because, so what you want to do is you want to practice and almost use like a pause shoulder press at that point in order to develop more capacity at that portion, okay? So for example, what you would do is you do a shoulder press, come down slower, and then I would physically pause at that point where you feel it the hardest. So in your case, if you're about 25% off of the ground, you're coming to the top, and then you want to load real heavy and then probably stop with maybe about 2 to 3 inches between the bar and your head in order to build capacity at that point, and then come back down, push up, and then come down slow, and then stop, which is probably going to be super, super hard, which is why you probably don't want to do it with a lot of weight. And I would actually even practice with dumbbells as opposed to a barbell if you can, just because with dumbbells, you'll be able to really isolate left to right side imbalances, which I'm guessing you probably have maybe a left arm, which is going to be a lot weaker as well too. So you might even see, so what I typically see for people who isolate, left to right like that, for unilateral work, they're going to be coming up, and then as they come down, they're going to hold, they're going to try to hold as much as they can. But then if they're right-handed, what's going to happen is this one's going to come down and then that one's going to come a little bit afterwards, okay? And so what you want to do is, and if that happens, that's normal, but just keep in mind that you want to try to slow it down as much as possible. Only load as much as the weaker arm can sustain. And you want to build really, so again, reps 1 through 5, slow and then tempo and then a pause there to be able to build capacity at that point. And you should, over time, be able to notice more capacity at that and more control at that bottom part. Because that's hard, because then that's probably going to scare you if you start dropping real fast when you're a couple inches off the ground. Like, I need a bigger pillow. You don't. You need to get stronger at the shoulder press at that part of it, and then until you're more comfortable with it. Yeah, that's a great question. Okay. Shoulder press, really quick tips on that. So remember, don't hyperextend when you do this. We talked about thoracic extension. Keep it really tight and tuck your chin back and try to push really close to your face as much as possible. It's not the exact same range of motion as a handstand push-up, because the handstand push-up, like we learned, is in that triangle. So this would actually be the most similar movement with the barbell. But you don't want to be pushing things too far away from yourself. It's a slightly different range of motion. Just keep the bar close. Keep what's manageable. And remember, always in that 1 to 5 rep range. And I believe that is it. So really quick review of everything we learned. There's 3 main things: flexibility, stability, and then strength when we're dealing with the handstand push-up. I'm going to be posting what this is in the on my video as well too. So you don't have to write anything down. Scapular wall slide, remember, against the wall, thorax tucked in, up and around, 3x12, and then you're warming up with thoracic extension, and then you're on the ground, you're twisting back and forth to help. Scratch chest, 1 over, 1 back, practice that regularly, and then stability is going to be front leaning rest, at least 60 seconds. If you do have access to a set of rings, that's going to make that movement a lot more difficult. It's also going to practice unilateral work, so you can also do it on dumbbells if, let's say, your wrists bother you. But if your wrist bother you, remember, you want to be doing that wrist flexibility stretch that we talked about as well. And then, yeah, just practicing that scratch chest left to right. What was I saying? Leaning rest. Oh, yes. And then handstand push-up position, getting into that triangle position, balancing out weight evenly. And I didn't mention it, but if having your head down on the mat is difficult for you, you also want to practice that teddy bear stand that we sometimes practice as well. Kind of like the crow stance that Tomas had posted a couple of weeks ago, which a lot of you guys have done that challenge, because that will help create better positioning and better creating better tension in the upper body. And then finally, strength, which is usually going to be the hardest part for most people, is accumulating pike negative handstand negative push-ups, and then handstand push-up negatives is going to be a step above that. And then finally, these two are going to be the hardest, building that shoulder press and then building the handstand push-up, and just trying to keep the reps really difficult, 1 through 5, so that you can get as strong as possible, so that you can continue to control your body. When you can, just to give you a rough idea, the last thing I'll say is for the handstand push-up negatives, when you can accumulate usually around like 5 to 7 in a row, like you do 1 over a 3-second descent, you come down, you do that again, you do that like 7 times, you can probably get pretty close to doing a handstand push-up. It just takes a really long time to build to a point where you can maintain that much time under tension. But that is the key. Build time under tension, because that will be the key to getting that movement. Okay. I had a lot to say, but I think I got it all in 41 minutes. Any questions?
Yeah. For the pike push-up,
Yes.
like in terms of building up strength, I feel like my limitation is actually hamstring. Like I can't get my legs close enough that it's hard, because my hamstrings are like,
Yeah, that's usually what really hurts.
yeah.
Good point.
Like I started doing yoga, and downward dog is not my friend. Like,
it's just painful, right?
yeah.
Okay.
So like, is there a different position, like getting my knees on the, like what else could I do?
Yeah, I would get my feet on some kind of elevated position, like probably like anything that is between like 6 and 12 inches, just to be able, and don't be afraid to bend the legs. So you've seen us like kind of do this movement sometimes on a box as well too. I wouldn't go as high as a 20-inch box right now, but I'd probably go off of a 12-inch box, same position, keep that TP position, bend the legs a little bit so you can release pressure off the hamstrings. Because our goal is not to try to stretch out your hamstrings. That's not the purpose of this exercise, is to try to build your upper body. And so bend in order to get into that position, and then keep driving forward the same way we practice in that handstand, in that tight position. Yeah, great question. And it's just an example of how everybody's a little bit different. So sometimes you have to play with these positions to kind of make sure that you can get into a good position for you. Yeah. Other questions?
So to build like a strict handstand push-up, is it kind of the same thing? Like, don't do kipping handstand push-ups to build strength, like do the other things more so?
Yeah, great question. So the way I would answer that is, so for the kipping handstand push-up, it's kind of the same rule applies to the kipping pull-up, right? Because if you think about it, I think everything has its own purpose. So the purpose of a strict pull-up or a strict handstand push-up is to try to make you stronger, ultimately. We're trying to build enough strength to be able to get that movement, because it's essentially like a body weight press, almost like a 3/4 body weight press. So we do the kipping movements for capacity, because it makes us much more out of breath in terms of creating more dynamic movement, right? But it doesn't necessarily make us stronger. And so that's the main thing is, I wouldn't work on the kipping handstand push-up. I would work more on the shoulder press and the pike handstand push-up, because they're more controlled and slower, but those movements will make you stronger over time. Yeah, but the kipping handstand push-up is still a good tool to build better capacity in terms of like, if let's say you wanted to increase your Diane time and you already had like 4 or 5 strict handstand push-ups, then I would try to get as many kipping handstand push-ups as possible in a short window of time, because then that will increase your capacity. So it just depends on what you want to do. But if you want to get a strict handstand push-up, focus on the strict movements, not the kipping. Yeah. Yeah, great. Anyone else have questions? Okay. I will, hold on. There you go. Boom. Shot 4. Let me just see who's in this group. And then what I'm going to do is keep you guys accountable. So are you guys all looking to kind of build your handstand push-up a little bit?
Yeah.
You can just go ahead and nod. That's okay. Okay. So what I'm going to do is in 2 weeks time, I'm going to touch base with you again. All right. I want you to pick one thing. That's it. I want you to pick one category from these three. Okay. That you will work on during the next 2 weeks. And I'm going to touch base just to make sure I keep you guys accountable and make sure you actually did it. So if you're watching this on the recorded version, just go ahead and comment in the comments and I'll add you to that list as well too. One thing, flexibility, stability, or strength. Whatever you felt like was the weakest, and I want you to practice these three movements over the next 2 weeks, and I'm going to touch base just to kind of see how you're doing. Cool? So that this doesn't just become like a thing we did, and then, oh, you remember that time we did this handstand push-up thing, and then nothing happened afterwards, which is often what happens, right?
Hey, John, I have a question.
Sure. What's up, friend?
I do have handstand push-ups like keeping.
Yeah.
I can do like maybe 5 at a time, but I cannot do one like straight.
Okay.
So what is
I-
this thing that I can do?
Yeah, so you want to know what you can do to try to get it strict?
Yes.
Okay. So I would practice the handstand push-up negatives for you, but I would make sure that you create as much time under tension as possible. So try to go really slowly down and just ask yourself, so when you're doing that position for the handstand push-up, just be sure that when you're coming down, the elbows aren't flaring out, okay? Because very often that will happen if, let's say, you only have a couple of kipping handstand push-ups. So if you see that your elbows are flaring up, go back to the pike push-up first, keep the elbows really tight, and then keep going down over time, 3-second negatives, right? And making sure that you really drive that head forward, and then try to go back to your handstand push-up. But if let's say you're doing handstand push-up negatives and you want to use the kip to go back up instead of coming off the wall, no problem. That's perfectly fine, as long as you focus on really good positioning in the negative, because the negative is the key to making your movement better. I've seen that like time and time again. It's the same thing for the pull-up. It's the same thing for the handstand push-up. The key is positioning, good like movement around the walls. You come down and up, but trying to overload that negative, that descent. That's how you kind of get used to the load, which is your body weight. Yeah, which is tough, that's why it's such a hard movement to do, is because there's no like, oh, I'm just going to do like a half body handstand push-up. No, it's just like, it's your body weight every time, which is why we can truly appreciate what gymnasts do on the ring. It's just like a magical thing that we have like no idea how they're doing it. It's like magic. Great question. Thanks, Ryan. Anyone else want to add anything? Okay. Great job, guys. So I took screenshots, so you guys are all on the hook now. No pressure, but just if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. If you have any videos you want to share as well too of your own movement, that you want to send to me directly, feel free to just send them over, and I will definitely keep an eye on them. Just remember, ideally you want them about 45 degrees off center. So if I'm up against the wall, they're like right here, so I can kind of see you from different angles. So I can just tell how your body's moving in relation to the wall, and elbow position and head position. All those things are important. Yeah. If I have any questions, I'll ask. Thanks a lot for joining me.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, I really
Very helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And thanks for all your support. Talk to you guys soon. Bye.